The year is 1177 AD. The powerful Khmer Empire has dominated the Southeast Asian mainland for centuries. A great and sophisticated civilization, they built the largest temple on earth, the resplendent Angkor Wat. And their capital is the largest city in the world. But now, the empire is faltering, and the Khmer suffer a great humiliation at the hands of an invading enemy. Their only hope lies with an exiled prince. The future of a great empire rests with one man. Centered in the vast northern plateau of what is now Cambodia, a great kingdom thrived for centuries. The Khmer were the builders of Angkor Wat, a masterpiece that's still the largest sacred structure ever built. Their culture was rich and complex, blending their adopted religion of Hinduism with older indigenous traditions and beliefs. Their art and monumental architecture was so impressive and advanced that some local people still believe they must have been built by gods. But it was the people of the Khmer Empire who built the great city of Angkor, and over 6 centuries filled it with nearly 1,200 splendid temples carved from stone. Eventually, this great civilization collapsed, and its capital city and grand temples were largely abandoned. Whatever invasions encroached here, the jungle's assault was the final one, swallowing much of the empire's former glory. It's often said that nature is the final conqueror of all things. Centuries ago, this jungle conquered and concealed a monumental human achievement, the ancient city of Angkor. Hi, I'm Yul Kwan. Cambodians had long whispered of a fabulous lost city in the jungle, and in 1860, the French botanist Henri Mouot discovered that it was real. And only now, 150 years later, are we starting to fully appreciate its secrets. Thanks to decades of painstaking research and restoration, we can travel back in time, recreate the splendor of ancient Angkor, and begin to understand how its creators lived. Angkor's lichen-covered temples still hide undiscovered treasures. This structure has been referred to as the Chamber of Jewels, where some claim glittering gems once adorned its walls. In the first half of the 12th century, the Khmer constructed Angkor Wat, the most massive temple on earth. The empire at that time dominated Southeast Asia and was ruled by a powerful and charismatic king, Suryavarman II. But after his death, the Khmer Empire faltered. Internal struggles and attacks by bordering empires weakened the Khmer territory. Then, in 1177, the Champa kingdom attacked Angkor. The Cham people ruled what is now Central and South Vietnam. Their surprise raid on the sacred city was a devastating event. A Khmer inscription tells a story. Full of proud confidence, the Cham king invaded our country, a paradise on earth. The invading king ravaged the city of Angkor and advanced on the Khmer royal palace itself. A stone sculpture records that, with a powerful fleet, he pillaged it and put the king to death, without listening to any reason or proposal of peace. The Khmer Khmer king lay dead. With their king murdered and their city occupied, the Khmer were deeply humiliated. To one man, the insults were unbearable. A royal prince whom history would call Jayavarman VII. In Cambodian culture, Jayavarman VII is both a hero and a mystery, with many details of his life remaining unknown. He was indeed a royal prince, though he probably didn't have a legitimate claim to the throne. He's believed to have been out of favor with the Angkor rulers, living with his wife in voluntary exile to avoid being killed. When the Cham army attacked, he wasn't in the city of Angkor and may in fact have been visiting the Champa Empire itself. Inscriptions carved during his reign describe him as a brave warrior, deeply pained by the subjugation of his native people. One account describes the brutal treatment of the Khmer at the hands of the Cham army. During the 8th moon, the king of Champa exacted from the Khmers thousands of human gallbladders. They would confront people, throw a hood over their heads. Then they would stab them in the side with a dagger and remove the gallbladder. This barbaric practice came from an ancient belief that the gallbladder contains a person's courage, and that by consuming the gall of one's enemies, a warrior would grow more brave and powerful. When Jayavarman VII heard of the brutal treatment of his people, he returned home to see for himself. Violence and chaos reigned in the occupied Khmer Empire. Jayavarman VII was already more than 40 years old when he learned the Khmer king had been killed. When he saw what was happening, he felt called to defend his homeland. The Khmer needed a hero and a galvanizing leader. But defeating the Cham would be no easy task. Jayavarman VII was born in Kampong Swai, more than 60 miles to the east of Angkor. Thanks to rich deposits of iron ore, the region was a major producer of weaponry. Jayavarman VII made this his home base as he worked to consolidate his power. He was able to raise a sizable army and began training, preparing his forces for war with the Cham. The Cham had invaded by water, bringing their fleet to the Mekong River, reaching Angkor from the giant lake Tonle Sap. Jayavarman VII's forces pushed the invaders back to the lake and eventually farther south. Then, in 1178, the Khmer hero and the Cham king clashed in a fierce battle. The Battle of Tonle Sap is perhaps the most famous in the history of ancient Cambodia. Khmer ships were almost 90 feet long and carried some 45 men. The Cham vessels were closely matched. The warriors fought with bows, arrows, and spears. The battle was long and bloody, and the forces fought hand to hand. Both Jayavarman VII and the Cham king fought alongside their men. An inscription reveals the outcome. Jayavarman VII slaughtered the Cham king and protected this land. Angkor Temple of Bayon, built later by Jayavarman VII, there's a vivid depiction of the day's fighting. The relief shows Sham soldiers shot by arrows, floating in the water, and torn to pieces by crocodiles. That old saying, history is written by the victors, was certainly true in the late 12th century. Almost everything we know about Jayavarman VII comes from inscriptions written during his reign. The passages are likely propaganda, but they do tell us a lot about life at that time. For example, we know that Jayavarman VII was a powerful king who broke with tradition in many ways. He became a devout Buddhist and was a compassionate ruler who put the needs and comfort of his people first. In 1181 AD, 3 years after the defeat of the Sham, Jayavarman VII was crowned king. He was likely accompanied by his queen, said to be as wise as the greatest learned men. When Jayavarman VII took the crown, his subjects swore an oath of loyalty to him. So began the reign of Jayavarman VII, considered one of the greatest rulers in the history of the Khmer Empire. But when Jayavarman VII ascended the throne, his people were in despair, and his kingdom lay in ruins. The new king quickly undertook a series of massive projects to restore and rebuild the capital city. First, he built a substantial defensive wall around the heart of the city, replacing a wooden parapet. Then he restored the moat surrounding the city and made it deeper. The enormous moat measured 400 feet across and was connected to the complex system of Angkor's waterways. By restoring the moat and installing the massive 30-foot-high wall, he made a city into an impregnable fortress which no invader could breach. This new wall defined Angkor Thom, Jayavarman's royal city built within the ancient Angkor region. Angkor Thom means great city, and even now, its parameters are distinctly outlined in the Cambodian jungle. The walls enclose the city 4 miles square, enormous by 12th century standards, and roughly 4 times the size of Paris at that time. To enter the city, then as now, visitors had to cross a wide bridge. Called the Naga, or Serpent Bridge, the South Gate Causeway is guarded on the left side by 54 evil spirits holding onto a giant snake. On the right side, 54 devas, or benevolent gods, do the same. This Serpent Bridge is an echo of the famous Hindu legend of the churning of the Sea of Milk. At the end of the bridge is a 75-foot-high tower called a Gopura. This traditional gate signifies the entrance to a holy city. Inside the gate lay a sprawling metropolis with great temples and public squares, as well as the ornate royal palace. This is the Terrace of the Elephants, the entrance to the royal palace. Though only the foundation remains, the impressive stone terrace once served as the royal reviewing stand for public ceremonies. Life-size statues and reliefs of elephants grace both sides of the central terrace. The images are appropriate because the square was also used to train combat elephants for battle. The king presided over public events from here, at the center of the terrace. Statues of a lion and the Naga, a mythical serpent, stand on either side of the king's platform. Mythical birds called Garudas support the terrace from beneath. On the north side of the terrace is a carving associated with a well-known legend. Called the Terrace of the Leper King, some believe it depicts a king who beheaded a subject for refusing to kneel before him. Infected by his subject's blood, the legendary king became a leper himself. On the other side of the square stand 12 stone towers called Prusat sur Prat. This area may have been used as a court for judging those accused of wrongdoing. The terrace was once a splendid public space, ringed with covered galleries gleaming in the sun. Jayavarman VII restored the palace within Angkor Thom. The palace was originally built in the 9th century, but burned down during the war. Until recently, the original appearance of the palace was a mystery. Aside from the gopura leading to the main entranceway and the 13-foot-high surrounding wall, the palace itself no longer stands. To learn more, French archaeologists drilled thousands of holes in the ground and analyzed the soil samples from here. We now know that the palace was built on top of a large wooden foundation, only fragments of which survive. This piece was 40 to 50 centimeters wide, 13 to 16 feet in length, about 8 inches in thickness and very sturdy. This was used as a foundation, and structures were built on top of this platform. The entire palace covered 37 acres. Its wooden columns are long gone, but it's often possible to see where they once stood. Other evidence of the placement of these columns is found throughout this area, indicated by stone foundations and indentations.
All the buildings here, the palace was built in wooden construction, and maybe they copied the techniques of bonding of pieces of stone from the wood construction.
The buildings of the palace would have been connected by splendid high-ceiling galleries supported by the columns. A row of columns 31 inches in diameter once stood on top of this stone platform. These columns were built with local trees called sloram and koki, which are so dense they sink in water. These sturdy supports held up a gallery roof, which did not survive. But history left us an invaluable description of the palace's facade. Near the end of the 13th century, a Chinese diplomat named Zhou Daguan was sent to the Khmer Empire and ended up staying for 11 months. The memoir he wrote about life in Angkor Thom is still a valuable resource for historians. In his book, The Customs of Cambodia, Zhou writes, "The main hall of the palace was covered with lead tiles. The rest had stone tiles, while the columns were engraved with images of the Buddha." This building had a two-layered roof, which was covered in shingles. As you can see here, most of the shingles were glazed. They were painted yellow or a greenish yellow, and along with porcelain, this was often used in the 10th century. Zhou Daguan's account reveals that the inside rooms of the palace were so heavily guarded he could not set foot in them. He could only glimpse a king from outside. But there are clues in a relief carved on the eastern side of the Bayon Temple, which records the lifestyle of the royal family. Splendid beams ornamented with flames decorate the eaves and the shingled roof, and the pattern is likely repeated inside the palace. Zhou Daguan also recorded what he saw of the king's chamber from far away. There is a golden window there, and below the window is the image of an elephant. For the first time ever, all these clues allow us to recreate what the palace may have looked like at the height of the Khmer Empire. The palace had many luxuries. Though it's now a children's swimming pool, this was once a royal outdoor bath, 50 yards wide and 100 yards long. Wooden galleries surrounded the bath on all sides and connected it to the other buildings. And Zhou Deguan mentioned what he saw here. There are 3,005 concubines and ladies-in-waiting living inside the palace. They bathe completely nude. And unlike most other people here, their skin is as pale as white jade. In the 13th century, the Angkor area supported a large population. Zhou Deguan writes that the people spent their leisure time watching cockfights and other entertainments. And, he said, they had plenty to eat. Zhou also wrote that in the countryside and rice fields were herds of thousands of wild water buffalo. Told an interesting old legend about a mystical snake called a Naga, which figures heavily in Khmer mythology. This story is set in the 10th century in the temple of Pimianakas, which means Palace of the Heavens. Inside the soaring palace is a secret temple. There are many wonderful places within the palace, Zhou wrote. And at nighttime, the king would always visit the tower. In the middle of the tower lived the spirit of a snake with 9 heads. And every night, this snake would turn into a beautiful woman. The king would bed this woman each night. And during this time, even the queen was forbidden to enter. And if the king neglected to visit this woman, even for a single night, a calamity would befall the kingdom without question. Jayavarman VII would have known this old tale, as well as others from Khmer mythology. But he differed from nearly every previous Khmer king because he was a Buddhist. Together with his queen, he performed a sacred ritual every May called Bathing the Buddha. Jayavarman VII very much admired an earlier Khmer king, Suryavarman II, who ruled 80 years previously. This was the revered Khmer ruler who ushered in a golden age and built the great temple, Angkor Wat. Suryavarman II began work on the enormous temple after he took the throne in 1113. Completed in just 40 years, this temple was designed as a Hindu shrine devoted to the god Vishnu. Inside, the central sanctuary featured a great gold statue of Vishnu. Jayavarman VII admired his predecessor's great temple, and he resolved to build his own. But his masterpiece would be a Buddhist temple in the center of Angkor Thom, his great walled city. Jayavarman VII's masterpiece is the Bayon, which still stands today. This dramatic temple is a rectangular structure 750 feet east to west by 500 feet north to south. No fewer than 52 towers rise to the sky, including the 140-foot-high central tower. And gazing impassively from the sides of these towers are the carved reliefs of 173 faces. The outer galleries of the Bayon are carved with more than 2,000 feet of reliefs, revealing rich details of everyday life at the time. There are images of men enjoying dogfights and foreign buyers harassing topless Khmer women who are selling items on the street. A woman points an accusing finger as she cooks. Her finger is directed at her son, who is wasting valuable time watching a cockfight. There's an image of a valiant Khmer warrior as he skewers an enemy Sham soldier with a spear. There's also a detailed scene of the Sham in their boats on Lake Tonle Sap as they invade Angkor. In the eastern gallery of the temple, the reliefs celebrate the life and reign of Jayavarman VII. There's a scene in which commanders mounted on elephants march toward the enemy at the king's orders. The Chinese soldiers with spears who follow the elephants on foot are believed to be mercenaries. In the reliefs of the Bayon, as well as the structure's mountainous shape, there are echoes of earlier Khmer temples. But the Bayon was built as a Buddhist shrine, not a Hindu temple. At its very center, Jayavarman VII placed a statue of Buddha. Though this sculpture is from a later period, the original statue was removed after Jayavarman's death, when the empire reverted to Hinduism for a time. The original was later discovered by a French excavation team and is now displayed on the palace square. The construction of the Bayon posed many challenges to its ancient builders. Interestingly, there is a scene in a gallery relief of the temple which depicts how the temple was constructed. It shows how the foundations were built. They used sand inside wooden frames in order to accomplish this. The reliefs depict how the foundations were built, how the stones were moved, and how they were stacked. Workers had to compact the soil in order to prepare the swampy building site. Then some 420,000 stone blocks were needed for the temple's construction. The stones came from a quarry at Phnom Kulen, 25 miles from the construction site. Using bamboo rafts, the stones were floated down the river toward Angkor Thom. From the size of the Buddha statue, we can tell that it was carved from a single block of sandstone. We think they built the central tower where the statue was enshrined first, and then the stone structures were built around that. Starting with the Buddha statue, construction progressed from the center outward, with the central tower going up first. Eventually, more towers were erected, and finally, the tower took its current form when the outer galleries and walls were built. Though now only columns remain, it's believed they once supported a wooden structure. Inside Bayon, there was a wooden structure built on top of a stone framework. Today, only fragments remain from where this structure was secured. This was a common architectural element often used in monuments during the time of Jayavarman VII. That is, from the end of the 12th century to the beginning of the 13th. This sturdy stone wall and door frame suggests there was once a door here. And there are other clues to how the temple once looked. Zhou Daguan's memoir describes the exterior of the Bayon. There is a golden tower at the center of the complex, and there are 20 stone towers surrounding it. In addition, there are some 100 stone chambers. The records of a Chinese diplomat who visited in the late 13th century are quite interesting. They contain information about the design of Angkor and its population. Unfortunately, some of the information is either erroneous or unverifiable. The records mention golden towers in Bayon, but we could not find traces of gold in Bayon. It's similar to a mention of bronze towers in Bapwan, but no traces of bronze were found there either. We think this may be because they painted the towers to resemble gold or bronze. But from an archaeological point of view, we can't prove it. Based on evidence and expert opinions, these computer images reveal the probable appearance of the Bayon when it was completed. In the exact center of Angkor Thom, Jayavarman VII built the splendid Bayon in honor of the Buddha. The most striking feature of the Bayon is also the most mysterious: the eerie faces gazing out from the temple. More than 200 of them hold your gaze wherever you look. Some are more than 25 feet high, and no two are exactly alike. But what do the faces mean? Are they meant to be gods or people? Were they sculpted as portraits, and if so, of whom? The answers are as fascinating and varied as they are controversial. One of the first modern scholars to study the Bayon was Georges Seydes, director of the French School of the Far East for 18 years. Seydes claimed that the faces on the towers were that of Jayavarman VII himself, portrayed in the form of the Buddha. This theory was accepted as fact for many years, but recently, prominent Japanese scholars have proposed an entirely different explanation. They claim the round faces with almond-shaped eyes are in fact devas, benevolent Hindu gods, while faces with angular features and protruding eyes are asuras, evil Hindu deities. These scholars believe the faces were recarved after the time of Jayavarman VII, when the empire reverted back to Hinduism. And in fact, many Buddhist artworks were defaced or destroyed during this era. Buddhist statues were removed from temples, and Hindu statues were often erected in their place. If the Bayon faces portray the king as the Buddha, they too may have been destroyed. For the past century, Bayon has been studied and restored by a host of scholars. But there are still some 60,000 stone blocks which have not yet found their former places. So why is Bayon in much worse condition than Angkor Wat, which was constructed just 80 years earlier? A team of Japanese scholars who have been restoring the temple for 16 years believe it has to do with the stone itself. According to recent research, the ancient builders used stones from several different quarries to build the temples in Angkor, digging new quarries as older ones became depleted or hard to work. So perhaps by the time the Bayon was constructed, the choice of stone was much more limited. The temples that were built before the Bayon era were built with high-quality gray sandstone. But after the late Bayon era, high-quality sandstone disappeared, and they began using sandstone with yellowish brown and red mixed in it. Bayon Temple was built during the late Bayon era, and the sandstone used in it lacks in quality compared to temples that were built a generation before, such as Angkor Wat. Jayavarman VII filled the Angkor region with temples and other structures. He also devoted considerable resources to expanding the city's water system. The Khmer's ingenious water management compensated for the extremes of the region's distinct rainy and dry seasons, using a complex network of canals, waterworks, and reservoirs. Rainwater was stored in ponds called barrays, then accessed throughout the year via canals. Although Angkor Thom was located far inland, it was a city on the water. You could travel by boat through the canals to Tonle Sap Lake and then sail the river all the way to the ocean. The Khmer Empire. The Chinese diplomat Zhou Daoguan reported that the Khmer could produce 3 or even 4 rice harvests a year, enough to feed 1 million people. He also described the wet season, saying that the high water mark around Lake Tonle Sap could reach 70 or 80 feet, completely submerging even tall trees. Modern scholars owe a great deal to Zhou, who wrote about Khmer life in great detail. His memoirs describe day-to-day city life, the economy, social customs, and even the king's relationship with his people. For example, Zhou wrote about the appearance of the king's procession in the year 1296. When the king went on an outing, he was accompanied by 300 to 500 ladies-in-waiting carrying candles in the daylight. He was escorted by a procession of horses, flags, and a band, as well as a retinue of female warriors. The king, his queen, and his concubines rode palanquins, coaches, horses, and elephants, and they were sheltered from the sun by 100 parasols decorated with gold. The tusks of the king's elephant were ornamented with gold, and the king carried a sacred sword in his hand. His hands were painted red, and he was surrounded by a battalion of elephants. There was a group of women who swept the road behind the king to erase any trace of the royal procession. If the king's procession was impressive, then his military resources were even more formidable. Included a division of 20,000 elephants, plus infantry, cavalry, and a division of archers who could shower the enemy with arrows. Each platoon consisted of 30 infantrymen armed with swords, hand weapons, and shields. Every platoon also had 5 horses and 1 well-trained elephant. Women were also part of the military. The elite royal guard was entirely female, and women warriors fought beside men in times of war. At the start of the 13th century, Angkor Thom and its surrounding area was the greatest city of its time. Jayavarman VII had successfully revitalized the Khmer Empire, in part through his impressive building projects. Besides his temples, he expanded the system of highways connecting his capital city to many other provinces. He also built 121 inns as well as 102 hospitals. Before Jayavarman VII came to power, the region was embroiled in turmoil and strife. Neighboring kingdoms saw Khmer disorder as an opportunity to expand. Once he came to power, Jayavarman strengthened his empire and expanded its reach through a series of military campaigns. Inscriptions describe his conquest of a neighboring territory, His army included a cavalry of Chinese horses, a division of elephants, female soldiers, and a full infantry. The newly improved highways offered more efficient routes for military travel. Long processions of soldiers and commanders covered great distances by road. The scene is depicted in a gallery relief in the Bayon. These long marches were comprised of more than just soldiers. Because each campaign lasted years and involved tens of thousands of troops, many soldiers brought along their families. It wasn't only a military mobilization, but a mass migration. Jayavarman VII's military conquests changed the history of both the Khmer Empire and all of Southeast Asia. There are few records from late in the king's reign, but histories record that he was a fierce opponent on the battlefield. One account states, Jayavarman VII swore an oath to take revenge against his enemies. He bore their impudence for 18 years and finally saw his plans to fruition. The Khmer often overwhelmed their enemies with a swift cavalry and a large infantry. Charging elephants no doubt struck fear in the hearts of the enemy. Much of the fighting was close hand-to-hand combat, using a sickle-like weapon called a pakak. Khmer troops were renowned as well-trained, determined warriors. Eventually, the Khmer Empire stretched from what is now Laos and much of Thailand in the north, to the Malay Peninsula in the south, Burma in the west, to central Vietnam in the east, almost all of mainland Southeast Asia. Jayavarman VII's rule strengthened and expanded the Khmer Empire. And to this day, Cambodians revere him as one of their greatest rulers. In the centuries since his reign, nature has obscured his capital city, the proud center of a powerful Khmer Empire. But the legacy of what he created endures. The stately terrace of the elephants, the haunting faces of Bayon Temple, and the many symbols of a deep Buddhist faith all continue to inspire visitors from around the world. Today, hundreds of monks still make pilgrimages to Angkor Wat to learn, teach, and worship as their ancestors did. Though modern conservationists cannot reverse hundreds of years of nature's advances, they can help us imagine how these palaces and temples once appeared and how they supported a vibrant and thriving Khmer civilization. Jayavarman VII was one of the greatest conquerors in Khmer history. He came to power when he was nearly 50 and ruled for at least 3 decades. During his reign, he dramatically strengthened and expanded his empire. But he's also known in modern Cambodia for another reason. As the first important Buddhist king, he changed the relationship between ruler and ruled. Now, like previous Hindu rulers, Jayavarman VII was still considered a god king, but he also reportedly cared deeply about his people and strived to relieve their suffering. It was definitely a change in style from earlier Khmer rule, and 800 years later, his influence on history can still be felt. Today, Buddhists, Hindus, Cambodians, and hundreds of thousands of people worldwide flock from the farthest corners of the globe to experience the splendor of Angkor. And though the kings who built these astonishing structures have long since passed, it is their triumphs that have left a great legacy, teaching us about the people of this sprawling empire and how their early accomplishments helped shape the world. It's the story of a young prince with great ambition, a king who took power by force, a ruler who built his legacy in the form of a spectacular temple, towering 100 feet above the Taj Mahal and containing more stone than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is the largest sacred structure anywhere on the face of the earth. Cambodia's extraordinary Angkor Wat. Early Western visitors were so awestruck by the ancient temple, they believed it was built by Alexander the Great or the ancient Romans. Of course, they were wrong. The builders of Angkor Wat were the ancient Khmer, the great and mysterious civilization that dominated much of Southeast Asia for 6 centuries and left behind one of the greatest architectural wonders ever created by human hands. On a lush plain, deep in the tropical forest of northwestern Cambodia, lie the ruins of the ancient city of Angkor. Once the sprawling capital of the vast Khmer Empire, Angkor was the largest city in the world. Today, Angkor is still a sweeping landscape. 400 square miles where more than 1,200 ancient temples still survive. Architectural masterpieces, fantastically carved from tens of millions of tons of local sandstone. The famous temples were built over a span of 5 centuries. They endure today as one of the world's greatest treasure troves of art, archaeology, and history. But the city of Angkor was eventually abandoned as a Khmer capital, and its temples were swallowed by the jungle, forgotten by the outside world. Not until the 19th century was the most famous of all the Angkor structures brought to the attention of the West. In January of 1860, the French naturalist Henri Mouot wrote, "One of these temples, a rival to that of Solomon and erected by some ancient Michelangelo, might take an honorable place beside our most beautiful buildings. It is grander than anything left to us by Greece or Rome." He was describing the splendor of Angkor Wat. When Smithsonian Magazine listed 28 places to see before you die, it called Angkor Wat a temple so magnificent it could only have been built by divine inspiration. And so it was. Inspired by gods, built by a man you've probably never heard of, but whose story is one of the world's great legends. Hi, my name is Yul Kwan, and it's my honor to take you on a journey back in time to discover the secrets of Angkor and relive the adventures of its creator, a ruler called Suryavarman II. 900 years ago, he led the Khmer Empire in what is today Cambodia, and this temple is his legacy. More than 1 million people visit here every year, overcome by its size and grandeur. But If you think this place is beautiful now, just wait till you see it in its glory days. This is a story of Angkor Wat. In the 12th century AD, a young man with royal blood was coming of age in the Khmer countryside. At that time, the Khmer Empire controlled large portions of modern Southeast Asia, including the prince's home of Lopburi, northwest of Angkor. The royal prince was said to be a skilled warrior, brave and wise beyond his years. He came to the attention of a prominent Hindu priest, Divakara Pandita, a religious leader with great influence in matters of state. Ambitious, royal, and well-connected, Suryavarman II began to dream of becoming king and ruling the vast Khmer Empire. Under the rule of Dharanendravarman, the turn of the 12th century was a time of chaos and fragmentation in the kingdom. His reign was marked by power struggles and turmoil. The aging Dharanendravarman was an ineffectual ruler who never succeeded in bringing order to his sprawling territories. Opposing factions arose throughout the empire. The young prince's clan gained influence in the north, while the older royal clans were pushed south. Divakara Pandita and other powerful priests backed the young prince, hoping he could unify the empire and bring harmony to the fractured kingdom. Civil war erupted as the forces vied for control. An inscription describes the moment the young prince took power, comparing him to a mythical bird. Suryavarman bounded to the head of the elephant of the enemy king and killed him as an eagle might kill a snake. Suryavarman II was only 17 years old when he seized control of the Khmer Empire in 1113 AD. This is him right here. Easy to miss among the mile of gods and spirits carved into Angkor's walls. It wasn't unusual at the time for a rebel to become king, but for Suryavarman II, killing the former king was only the first stage. He still had to conquer the rest of an empire that was in utter disarray. The crown would only be his if he could end the turmoil and unify the land. It took 6 long years for Suryavarman II to solidify his control over the vast empire and conquer the southern factions. But now, at last, the entire Khmer Empire was united under a single ruler, and peace was finally restored. Suryavarman's soldiers and subjects took an oath of loyalty that strengthened his realm. We will serve no other king. We will sacrifice our lives for our king in the face of war. We will be reborn in the 32 hells if we break our oath. In 1119, at the royal palace of Angkor, Suryavarman II officially became the 18th king of the Khmer Empire. He was given the royal title Suryavarman, Protector of the Sun, and was coronated alongside his queen. This moment ushered in the golden age of the Khmer Empire. Suryavarman II was only 23 years old when he was crowned ruler of one of the greatest empires of Asia. Just as Khmer kings had done for centuries, Suryavarman II ruled from Angkor, the seat of the Khmer Empire. But its soul resided in another place. Traditionally, newly crowned Khmer rulers would make a pilgrimage to the sacred Phnom Kulen, a mountain range 25 miles northeast of Angkor. 3 centuries before Suryavarman II, the empire's first monarch, Jayavarman II, came to the same mountain on a similar spiritual journey. A sacred ritual anointed him the first supreme ruler, an event that marked the founding of the Khmer Empire. This hallowed spot had deep religious and political significance for the Khmer and is still considered holy by modern Cambodians. This river was a source of the ingenious water system that was key to the wealth and success of the entire region. The religion of the early Khmer Empire was Hinduism, and this sacred mountain is richly carved with images of Hindu deities, including Vishnu. The river here flows over other sacred icons. 1,000 linga rise from the riverbed. Carved over the centuries during the dry seasons, these stone phalluses are symbols of fertility and the male creative force. The corresponding female symbol is a yoni, a vessel shape that represents feminine creative energy. The linga is often placed upon the yoni. Together, the two forms symbolize the indivisible connection between male and female, the union from which all life springs. Waters that washed over these sacred stone carvings were thought to carry fertility and abundance to the lands of the empire. Metaphorically, these waters also conveyed the power of the king throughout his kingdom. A king's power was also expressed by monumental architectural structures. It was customary for a Khmer ruler to build one or more temples during his reign, usually dedicated to the god Vishnu. The third Khmer king, Indravarman, built this red brick temple in 879 AD. It's called Priako, and he built it in honor of his ancestors. Bindaya Sri Temple was built more than a century later. Its name means Citadel of Beauty. Its famous carvings are still considered among the highest achievements of Khmer art. The 9th century Baekong Temple, with its massive moat, may have inspired Suryavarman II. When it came time for the newly crowned king to begin planning for his temple, he decided to create a structure that would exceed all other temples in both size and grandeur. He entrusted this ambitious undertaking to the same Brahmin priest who helped him take the throne. Divakara Pandita would oversee the planning and construction of Angkor Wat. Within the city of Angkor, Suryavarman's temple would follow the customary structure of other Khmer shrines. Khmer temples represent the mythical Mount Meru, the center of the universe and home of the gods according to Hindu cosmology. But the temple Suryavarman planned was on a scale that would dwarf all other temples anywhere in the world. A scale that would tax every ounce of skill, ingenuity, and technology of his entire empire. Think about this. In medieval Europe, at around the same time, people were building cathedrals that took centuries to complete. Meanwhile, here in Asia, the builders of Angkor Wat somehow created a temple that was far larger and in some ways more complicated in less than 4 decades. So how'd they do it? Well, archaeologists and engineers have been trying to solve the mysteries of Angkor Wat's construction since the 19th century, and they've managed to uncover some, but not all of its secrets. It was around the year 1120 AD when an army of construction workers took on what must have seemed like mission impossible. On a swampy forest plain, they would build the largest sacred structure in the known world. Using only simple tools, workers prepare the site, digging the foundation in the midst of a dense jungle. One clue to exactly how they prepared the foundation was discovered in the nearby Bayon Temple, built several decades after Angkor Wat. In this carving, laborers work side by side, beating the ground with long wooden poles. It's believed the relief illustrates how the builders solved one of the most vexing problems of Angkor Wat's construction. Workers used sticks to tamp down and compact the wet soil, creating a more suitable foundation. They dug a massive hole in the ground, 33 feet deep, filled it with layers of sand, pebbles, and clay, and compacted it until it was hard. This allowed excess water to drain and also stabilize the surface. It was only after the foundation was laid that the structure's elaborate design was finalized. The massive compound would be almost a square mile and would be surrounded by a moat 660 feet wide. Only a ruler with Surya Rama II's might, power, and vision could have imagined a building constructed on this grand a scale. It is estimated the building required more than 5 million tons of raw materials. Where did the ancient temple builders mine such a tremendous amount of stone? Gray sandstone was used to build Angkor Wat. It was quarried from Phnom Kulen, a mountain over 24 miles northeast of the site. The sacred mountain of Phnom Kulen proved a great resource for the builders of Angkor Wat. The mountain's base is a massive 22-mile-long belt of sandstone, a plentiful source of high-quality building material. But how did the ancient workers excavate all that rock? They used iron rods with sharp ends and dug a groove the size of the block they wanted to remove. Then they would place a wedge between the sedimentary layers where it's easy to break the rock. Or in some cases, several men worked together, pounding the rock and breaking it in order to pry it loose. With only hand tools, workers removed vast amounts of rock from the mountain. It is estimated that it took a stone cutter at least 10 days just to carve a groove around one block of stone weighing more than a ton. After the groove was carved, a wedge was placed in the groove so the rock could be separated. It took a workforce of thousands to cut just a few hundred blocks of stone each day. More than 600,000 high-quality sandstone blocks were used in the construction of Angkor Wat. 5 million tons of sandstone. Because the builders used no mortar, blocks had to be precisely cut with utterly smooth surfaces. A system lifted a stone block just slightly above another stone, and then workers pushed it back and forth in order to grind the two surfaces and make it smooth. Another relief in Bayon Temple has a detailed depiction of how this method worked. Workers used poles and ropes to lift one stone just above another. Then the top stone was rubbed back and forth against the stone below. After thousands of repetitions, the block obtained a smooth surface. Exactly which Phnom Kulen quarry the stones came from remains a mystery. But a Japanese research team from Waseda University recently tested the stone's magnetic properties. Their findings reveal each stone's approximate age and geological distribution. But matching the stones back to a particular place or quarry in this mountainous belt is not simple or safe. Magnetic susceptibility is the inclination of rock to be drawn to a magnet. By measuring this, we can tell that they used 7 different quarries during the various different ages. Unfortunately, it's impossible to conduct research to find the exact location of the quarries in Phnom Kulen because the place is littered with mines. But according to research conducted by the French School of the Far East, there were numerous quarries at Phnom Kulen. Landmines left from Cambodia's 20th century civil war still litter the countryside, making research dangerous. Although the exact quarry locations are unknown, testing reveals that stone used in 30 Angkor area temples came from 7 different Phnom Kulen quarries. However, nearly all of the stones of the Angkor Wat temple have magnetic levels of around 3. This means that the stones used to build the Angkor Wat temple almost certainly came from a single quarry in the Mount Kulen region. The massive cut stones were transported over 25 miles to Angkor using elephants as well as slave labor. Rods were drilled into the huge blocks so they could be pushed and pulled. Laborers also used bamboo rafts to float the stone on a labyrinth of canals and rivers. A river called the Siem Reap flows most of the way to the building site and then connects to a large natural lake just south of Angkor. After a journey of several weeks, they enter the last canal, and the rafts reach their final destination at Angkor Wat. Over the 37 years it took to build the temple, experts estimate that at least 20,000 people a day were needed. A throng of people who had to be transported, housed, and fed. It was a huge workforce by 12th century standards. This great labor force suggests the city as a whole also had a large population. But how large? One clue comes from a nearby temple, built later the same century. According to an inscription in Priya Khan, 97,480 village personnel were assigned to the smaller temple, while 100,000 farmers and slaves contributed to the temple's maintenance. Based on this, experts estimate that the population of the Khmer capital was at least 700,000. This means Angkor's population probably exceeded that of all 12th century cities. Paris had only 100,000 people at the time, and London had just 70,000. Only China's Kaifeng city was similar in size. One secret to how Angkor supported this large population lies in an ingenious system of waterways. Then, as now, agriculture centered on rice grown on the Angkor Plain. In addition to rice, other grains, fruits, and vegetables were also cultivated, just as they are today. The success of this economy depended on the huge Lake Tonle Sap, just south of ancient Angkor. Irrigation canals assured one or more harvests, even in drought years. Suryavarman's kingdom was strong and wealthy, but could it really build so massive a temple on a scale never before seen? The young king was determined to see Angkor Wat completed in his lifetime. And his ambition was not limited to temple building. He also sought to extend his kingdom's borders. He was drawn to the eastern edge of the empire, where an invasion and conquest would have been a political asset. Occupying what is now South Vietnam, the powerful Champa kingdom controlled the coast and trade routes long coveted by the Khmer. Beginning early in his reign, Suryavarman II led a series of invasions into neighboring territories. According to inscriptions, in one battle, the king led a force of 700 ships and 20,000 soldiers. Armed only with bows, arrows, and spears, the warriors fought their enemies hand to hand. Another inscription describes a different invasion in Suryavarman's career. The ruler of Angkor turned his ambitions for conquest towards the Sham people. He invaded, taking the capital city and becoming the ruler of the territory. The Khmer Kingdom solidified its control of most of the Indochina Peninsula, including much of modern-day Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. The Khmer armies took prisoners, and together with other slaves in the empire, they were likely used as forced labor to construct Angkor Wat. The huge construction project was made possible by slave labor, but it couldn't solve an unanticipated and alarming engineering problem. The first stone structures built on the site collapsed, and the human cost was high. The success of the entire project was at stake. No amount of slave labor could overcome the most serious challenge the builders faced. The site itself was a swamp and seemed completely unsuitable for a building the size and weight of the proposed temple. The soil was spongy and hard to work with, and water would flood in one season, then drain away the next. These days, engineers would use heavy machinery and reinforced concrete to tame nature's fury. But the Khmer builders had to be a bit more creative, and their solution became one of the ancient world's greatest feats of engineering.
Angkor Wat is surrounded by a gigantic moat. More than 600 feet wide, it contains tens of millions of gallons of water. To the Hindu, the original designers of the temple, the moat symbolized the cosmic ocean. But besides its religious significance, it turns out the moat also has a practical purpose. Because this is swampland, without the moat, the monsoon rains would seep into the earth and push the buildings up. Then, in the dry season, the water would drain out of the land, making the buildings crumble. The huge moat surrounding the complex actually stabilizes the water content of the earth under the temple, keeping it consistent year-round so the earth doesn't heave. And they found other remarkable solutions to the challenges of pre-industrial construction.
We have an artificial mountain, and we are sitting on the first floor. Yeah, they built a case from stone, and then they filled with sands and densified very much, and then the next case, and so step by step they got the mountain. And we can see inside there's sand, then there's laterite, which is this specific brownish stone in tropic countries, and then outside there's the sandstone.
The central tower of Angkor Wat reaches 213 feet into the sky. The ancient architects had to figure out how to stack the massive stones without machinery. First, they built earthen ramps. Then, laborers and elephants dragged the stones up the ramps. Finally, it's believed they erected scaffolding and lifted each stone to the top. Remarkably, the temple was built from the inside out. The tallest central tower was erected first. Then the surrounding towers were built, and finally the outer galleries and walls were added. The builders raised these columns made from single blocks weighing as much as 7 tons. They used a simple but brilliant method for setting up the 1,532 columns around the temple complex.
Angkor Wat has survived fairly intact for nearly 900 years, an achievement that surely would have pleased its builders. But the swampy site and Cambodia's tropical climate have definitely taken a toll on these buildings. Although some intricate sandstone features show few signs of their age, others have worn away and decayed. Certain original features, like the gold leaf ornamentation that would have awed early visitors, are gone forever, looted after the Khmer Empire's decline. When it was completed around 1150 AD, Angkor Wat was the biggest building in the world, about the size of 11 football fields. Now, teams of scientists and archaeologists have spent years trying to figure out what the temple might have looked like in its heyday. And they've pieced together the puzzle, data point by data point. And now, with the help of 21st century technology, we can finally get a glimpse of Angkor Wat's original splendor.
Many of the structures were close to white, but some of the sculptures were glazed in many colors. Most of the surviving colors are yellowish brown or red. That's because the pigments had an iron oxide base, which lasts for a long time. But the other colors, such as blue, yellow, and green, have all disappeared. The exterior walls and columns were most likely white from a coating of lime. But it was the roofing material that dominated the look of the temple. The towers were most likely covered in gold, which deteriorated over the centuries after Angkor Wat was built. Some historians believe that the towers may even have been re-gilded by one or more of the rulers who followed Suryavarman II. It is easy to imagine that the plaster on all of the towers was used as a base layer for the gilding, which made the entire structure extremely ornate and visually striking. This computer image was created based on the opinions and research of scholars. White plastered walls contrast with the golden lintels and towers. On a bright day, the entire temple would have sparkled in the sun. Suryavarman II didn't live to see his fantastic temple completed, but he probably saw it in the later stages of construction. What did the king feel as he saw this magnificent structure taking shape? It was a palace fit for a god. And he must have known it would also become his tomb. Only fragments of the wood that once covered the interior stone walls still remain. It's believed the wood was highly decorated, inlaid and ornamented with a wide variety of patterns. Gilded doors divided the chambers, and the gallery walls and ceilings would have been lavishly adorned. Since the king first set eyes on these galleries, millions more have journeyed to admire these dramatic scenes. The carvings encircle the entire outer gallery from floor to ceiling. Measuring 2,600 feet, it is the longest continuous bas-relief in the world. In the North Gallery, this famous relief, called the Battle of Kurukshetra, depicts an ancient combat scene from Indian history retold in the epic work, the Mahabharata. Angkor Wat's walls are covered with 12,900 square feet of bas-relief carvings. Executed with great skill and artistic sophistication, the reliefs are considered a masterpiece in their own right. These carvings cover multiple blocks of sandstone and are so perfectly fitted together that the seams are almost invisible. Even the detailed lintels at the top of the walls are carved from the same stone blocks. Each artist would cut away layers of the wall and then carve the reliefs directly into the stone. Hundreds of highly skilled carvers worked side by side to complete the work in only decades. Experts admire not only the expressive human figures in the carvings, but also the remarkable perspective these early artists were able to achieve. Continuing along to the southern gallery, visitors encounter a 260-foot depiction of Suryavarman II's full royal procession. Military leaders, priests, musicians, standard bearers, servants, and royalty all take their place in this carving. The carving's centerpiece is the famous portrait of Suryavarman II himself. Lingering traces of gold hint at its former splendor.
Maybe the king was partly gilded. We can see some of the gildings on the relief with Suryavarman II.
The famous portrait of the king was gilded and surrounded by red, the color symbolizing protection and strength. Continuing to the east side gallery, a visitor finds perhaps the most famous and revered of all the reliefs, the churning of the Sea of Milk. The famous portrait of the king was gilded and surrounded by red, the color symbolizing protection and strength. Continuing to the east side gallery, a visitor finds perhaps the most famous and revered of all the reliefs, the churning of the Sea of Milk. It depicts Vishnu and Devas, the benevolent Hindu gods, and the Asuras, the evil gods, all pulling on a great snake to churn the cosmic sea in search of eternal life. Their struggle released countless deities, including the beautiful nymphs called Apsaras. In the northern gallery is a battle of the gods and demons. This epic battle scene illustrates the pantheon of 21 Hindu gods battling alongside human warriors. Led by Vishnu, the gods of good defeat the evil gods. And as Suryavarman II was considered an earthly avatar of Vishnu, the scene celebrates his reign as well.
It could be said that the entire temple of Angkor Wat is a single work of art. The artifacts and engraved scenes aren't simply ornaments installed in the temple, they're carved into the very structure itself. Once the enormous blocks were in place, artists chiseled symbols, figures, and deities into virtually every surface of the sandstone. All of this dazzling creation forged into one extraordinary and sacred sculpture. Now, of all the carvings, these are some of the most popular. They're called apsaras, or in English, celestial nymphs, supernatural women who are said to dance for the gods. They supposedly had the power to change their shapes or influence whether a gambler won or lost. But someone wasn't taking any chances. There are nearly 1,800 of them depicted all around the temple. "1,796 full-body sculptures of divine women were carved at Angkor Wat. With a wide variety of facial features, hairstyles, and headdresses, no two are exactly alike. These temple guardians and dancers were probably based on actual women residing near the temple in the 12th century. Apsaras are everywhere you look in the temple, standing alone in meditation or sometimes in pairs or groups. Each pose of these dancers has a meaning, and together, the movements of the dance tell a story. It's a form of dance still very much alive in modern Cambodia. Called the Apsara dance, this art form has passed from generation to generation in an unbroken line from the time of Suryavarman II and before. According to Hindu mythology, the gods made 600 million apsaras when they created the universe, and these celestial nymphs were released to the world when the deities churned the cosmic sea of milk. The temple of Angkor Wat probably had 3,000 or more apsara dancers assigned to it to entertain the king and his visitors as well as the gods.
The Apsara dance almost died out in the 1970s during Cambodia's Khmer Rouge regime. Dancers at the time were targeted as intellectuals and elitists, and they were killed. Today, this ancient dance is once again a visible part of Cambodian culture. It has been recently revived by dancers studying Apsara carvings at Angkor Wat. Leaving behind the outer galleries, a visitor would next reach the second level of Angkor Wat. Here, columns border a cross-shaped gallery that mimics the layout of the temple's central level. These galleries lead the way to a large pool where the king and the Brahmins purify themselves before performing rituals to the gods. Here, lingering traces of colors that covered the surfaces suggest how the temple once looked. At the center of the cruciform gallery is a column which is colored in 5 layers of paint that alternates between white and red. First, they used red pigment on a white background. In the next generation, they painted using red pigment on a white background again. Although we don't know why, they finally covered everything in white, so it currently looks pink. Every trace of ancient residue adds clues to Angkor Wat's glory, as its royal patron once saw it. As in many Hindu temples, the 5 towers of Angkor Wat represent the 5 peaks of sacred Mount Meru, the residence of the gods in the ancient tradition. The highest tower soars as high as Notre Dame Cathedral. In all, 10 stairways lead to the central tower, a deviation from temples built earlier, such as the 11th century Bapwan. In the case of Bapwan, the 4 stairways on the 4 sides were added later on because of safety issues. The stairways were added in order to solve problems which arose during the construction of Bapwan. But in Angkor Wat, they were included in the plans from the very beginning of construction. As a result, a new and very special style of architecture was created. All the stairways, except those in the central corridor, are too steep to climb with ease. These features are thought to be a reminder that the path to enlightenment is not easy. The moat symbolizing the great cosmic sea encloses 500 acres of land where the temple of Angkor Wat sits at its majestic center. Although it is now a Buddhist sanctuary, Angkor Wat was built as a Hindu temple honoring Vishnu, the Hindu god Suryavarman II was closely associated with. As impressive and inspiring as they are now, the towers were surely once even more so when their gold gleamed in the sun. Inside the highest tower was a central sanctuary where the king built a shrine to Vishnu. A golden statue of Vishnu reigned over the entire temple from this place of honor. Long after the reign of Suryavarman II, when the Khmer Empire became a Buddhist nation, the statue of Vishnu was replaced with the likeness of Buddha, which remains to this day. In the mid-12th century, when Suryavarman II visited his nearly completed masterpiece, he was nearing the end of his life and his reign.
Suryavarman II's rule is considered the golden age of the Khmer Empire, and Angkor Wat is the ultimate symbol of his dynasty. It's not known exactly when the king died. It was probably around the year 1150 AD, not long after the completion of the temple. What happened next is unclear, because there are no records for the period after his death. But what we do know is that it was a time of great turmoil. The next king reigned only briefly before war and discord began sapping the empire of its strength. Suryavarman had conquered his part of the world, expanded his empire, and successfully created one of the world's greatest monuments. But of all his achievements, only Angkor Wat would stand the test of time. The image of Angkor Wat has graced the Cambodian flag since 1953, and it remains a source of great pride for modern Cambodians.
Over the course of his 4-decade rule, Surya Rama II increased the Khmer Empire by more than 100,000 square miles, establishing himself as a great warrior king. When he was entombed in his own greatest creation, he was given the posthumous name Parama Vishnuloka, or he who has entered the heavenly world of Vishnu. After he died, the Khmer Empire fell into disarray. Opposing factions vied for power, and the country suffered invasions by neighboring forces. Today, Angkor Wat is a cherished reminder of the Khmer Empire's past glory, and a source of great pride in modern Cambodia. A UNESCO World Heritage Site, it draws 1 million visitors per year from around the globe. Symbol, temple, tomb, and treasure, Angkor Wat is a masterpiece of ancient monumental architecture. It has few rivals anywhere on Earth.